Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your Black Belt Leader within. Hey, this week I want to lean into the lesson of the iceberg, and I want to start with a familiar story, the story of the Titanic. Now, if you're familiar with that very sad event, the sinking of the Titanic on its maiden voyage, traveling from England to the United States, was one of history's major maritime disasters. And here's what I can tell you, it's become a prominent part of culture even today. Books and major motion pictures have retold this story over and over again. Now, going back to the origins of the Titanic, this was an unsinkable luxury liner, or at least that's the way it was deemed by its designers. It was the largest and it was the most luxurious ship of its time. From a technical matter, the Titanic was 882 feet long, it was 92 feet wide, and it was over 10 decks in height. It weighed 46,000 tons. Remember that number. It weighed 46,000 tons and was designed to carry over 2,200 passengers and crew. Now, we all know the story about how this British passenger liner struck an iceberg fatefully on April the 14th, 1912. Now, interestingly enough, the Titanic was designed to carry 64 lifeboats, but on its maiden voyage, for whatever reason, it only carried 16. Now, this led to a significant shortage of capacity for passengers and crew to be able to safely leave this sinking vessel, and the result, the loss of over 1,500 lives. Many of those individuals having to leap into the freezing waters of the Atlantic and dying of hypothermia. Now, the iceberg that struck the Titanic itself was a massive object. It was estimated to be 400 feet long, with over 100 feet of its 600 to 700 foot height visible above the waterline. Now, it likely broke off from a glacier in southern Greenland and had floated and made its way into the North Atlantic. And despite melting for months, it's estimated that this iceberg that sank the Titanic weighed an estimated 1.5 million tons at the time of the collision. Think about that. 46,000 tons coming into contact with 1.5 million tons. It's no matter the Titanic, as great as it was and as unsinkable it was believed to be, suffered a fateful event that day that led to its sinking in the Atlantic. Now, interestingly enough, the iceberg's flat shape and its very low height above the water made it very difficult for the spotters to see in the dark. Now, this was especially true because on this faithful night, it was a moonless night, and the crew scanning the horizon could barely see much farther than the bow of the boat. Now, the crew had been warned there were icebergs in the vicinity, but for whatever reason, the captain chose not to slow the Titanic down as they were traveling through areas known for large icebergs. In fact, studies show that the Titanic struck that iceberg at a speed of 22.5 knots. Now, that's slightly below the ship's maximum speed of 23 knots. So, for whatever reason, the captain and the crew decided that they were going to plow through this cold area of the North Atlantic with iceberg warnings abounding and get through that. Maybe they were trying to beat a record or meet a record, but for whatever reason, they were moving much faster than they should have been moving. And sadly, because of the darkness of the night, that iceberg was spotted by iceberg spotters only seconds before impact. And the rest, as they say, is history. Now, I don't want to focus so much on the Titanic as I do on the iceberg, because there's a significant lesson that the iceberg wants to teach us, and that's where I want to spend a few moments. But let me set the story up before we get into the lesson of the iceberg. Now, icebergs are large pieces of freshwater ice, and they've broken off from glaciers or ice shelves. This is a process known as calving. Now, icebergs come in various sizes, from small growlers to massive ice islands, and all shapes and sizes in between. So-called tabular icebergs, like the one that struck the Titanic, have flat tops and steep sides, while non-tabular icebergs are shaped like a dome, a wedge, or a spire, or if it has multiple spires, it's referred to as a pinnacle. Now, an iceberg the size of a pickup truck or a piano, again, are referred to as growlers. A house-sized iceberg is referred to as a bergy bit. Now, there's also an iceberg called a dry dock, and this is an iceberg with a channel or a slot that's been formed by erosion that small vessels can actually go up inside the iceberg and be surrounded on three sides by the iceberg. Think of that as a bay inside of the iceberg. Now, large icebergs, and especially very large icebergs, can exceed 240 feet in height. That's 75 meters for those of you over in Europe, and more than 670 feet in length. Again, 213 meters for those of you overseas. Now, icebergs drift with the ocean currents. They're driven by the wind and the waves. And it's important to remember that only a small portion of the iceberg can be seen above the surface of water. And because of that, and the inability to see this massive chunk of ice, most of it submerged below the water, they pose a hazard to ships because of their massive size and their massive weight. And as a result of the Titanic disaster, an international ice patrol was created to track icebergs and to warn ships of impending danger. Now, the freshwater formation of an iceberg comes from snow that's been accumulated over thousands of years and has been packed into glaciers and ice shelves. As a result, the water itself inside the iceberg is very pure and it's safe to consume in most instances. Iceberg melt, the melting of an iceberg as it travels through the ocean, contributes fresh water, and this affects circulation patterns in the ocean. It changes the salinity and the buoyancy of the water, and interestingly enough, it's a crucial part of the thermohaline circulation model, which helps distribute nutrients around the globe. Now, an iceberg's weight can vary dramatically from from thousands to tens of thousands of tons based on its size. Let me give you one example. The massive A32A iceberg is roughly 40 miles wide. It covers an area of about 1,500 square miles. It measures 1,312 feet in thickness. Now, for comparative purposes, that's about 3 times the size of New York City. The A32A iceberg weighs approximately 1 trillion tons. Now, that's 2 quadrillion pounds. That's 15 zeros after the 2. Or said another way, that's 2,000 trillion or 2,000 million pounds. Now, on a personal note, a few years ago, my wife and I had the opportunity to go on a cruise, and we spent 10 days traveling and doing the Inside Passage of Alaska. An incredible voyage, and if you've never had an opportunity to do that, I highly recommend it. And I highly recommend you go in the month of August because it is a beautiful time of the year, and it's a great time to go visit the great state of Alaska. Now, one of the highlights of our cruise was the day we spent at Glacier Bay National Park. Our Holland America cruise ship, the Volendam, literally paled in comparison to this massive glacier as we rolled into the bay in our ship, and we actually stopped and floated and watched this massive ice structure slowly make its way down the fjord. And as we sat there on the top of the ship and we're out there observing this massive glacier, we began to watch as house-sized chunks of ice began to tear away from the face of this glacier. Now, those house-sized chunks of ice, we were told by the crew on the ship that each one of those weighed somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 tons each. And as they hit the water, they were displacing thousands of gallons of water as they splashed into the bay. Now, I want you to think about that. As these massive house-sized chunks of ice, 100,000 to 200,000 tons each, peeled away from the glacier and struck into the bay, our 61,400-ton cruise ship rocked back and forth like a little small rowboat in response to these massive icebergs displacing the water in the bay. Now, for me, it was a very sobering moment to realize that as great as man's accomplishments were, and this was a beautiful ship that we were on, nothing compares to the awesome power of nature. As my wife and I were there, we were witnessing the birth of icebergs on a colossal scale. And this was a process that was repeated over and over again while we were there. But I came to the realization that it was not only happening at Glacier Bay, but this very same iceberg birthing, this calving process, was happening at similar locations around the globe. Now, once these massive chunks of ice struck the water and the waves subsided, only a very small portion of these house-sized icebergs remained visible above the surface of the water. Now, I asked one of the crew members why this was the case, and he shared with me that ice is less dense than the surrounding seawater, and as a result of that, the icebergs float. But the vast majority of the iceberg, roughly 85 to 90% of it, lies beneath the surface of the water. And this gives rise to the expression, the tip of the iceberg. Now, it's a reminder to you and me that there's more to an iceberg than we can see with the naked eye. And this is the lesson of the iceberg. Let me share that again. It's a reminder that there's more to the iceberg than we can see with the naked eye. And this is the lesson of the iceberg. Okay, John, what do you say? Let me bring it to you this way. What others see when they look at us, and sometimes what we see when we see ourselves in the mirror, is only a small part of who we really are. What's lurking beneath the surface of our lives is often more substantial, more impactful, and more influential than other people realize, and sometimes more substantial, more impactful, and more influential than we may realize ourselves. So if only 20% of an iceberg is visible of the water, what's the 80% lurking below? What does that look like? And what is below the surface? What lies beneath the waves? More importantly, if only 20% of who you and I are visible to those around us, what are they, the other people around us, not seeing in the 80% of who we are that's lurking below the surface of our lives? That is an interesting thought. If they only see 20% of who we are and they don't see the 80% that they can't yet see or we haven't revealed to them, are they making judgments and gaining opinions of us without knowing who and what we truly have to offer? So I want to quickly examine 8 elements of you that are lurking below the surface, waiting to be revealed. The first of those things about you lurking below the surface is untapped potential. Now, what do I mean by that? While those around us only see our success or failure in the moment, they may not realize that's only a small part of the story of who we are. So what other people don't see lurking beneath the surface of our lives, hidden from their view, is our discipline, our resilience, the lessons we've learned from success and failure, and the countless hours that you and I put in to developing ourselves. They don't see the sacrifices we made, the tough choices we've had to make the decision to do, knowing it was going to cost us something. And they don't see how those sacrifices, those choices, and all of the things that we've not done to focus on becoming a better version of ourselves, they don't see how those things have molded us and made us the powerful people that we are. That is untapped potential. The second thing lurking beneath the surface of our lives is undiscovered resources. Now, many of us, in fact, most of us, have skills and talents and abilities that are lurking below the surface level of our lives. For many of us, those skills and talents and abilities have yet to be discovered, developed, and deployed. It's like that black belt leader lurking within you, lurking within me, that is yet to be revealed to the world because we've not yet discovered it ourselves and fully developed its potential so we can deploy it and make a difference. Those skills, those talents, those abilities, they're lying there deep within us, latently hiding, waiting to be revealed to us and to the world when we do one thing, when we try something new, when we venture into the unknown, and when we keep asking ourselves, what if? That is the undiscovered resource. Now, the third thing lurking below the surface of our lives is unreleased hurts. Now, icebergs may contain impurities, those things that are added to or mixed into the ice, such as sand or dirt or gravel or other chemical compositions that may have flown into that water before it froze. And buried beneath the surface of our lives, similar impurities may exist. What am I talking about? Unreleased hurts from things that have happened in our past. Those unreleased hurts, those things we've not yet let go of, are holding us back from achieving our full potential. So, part of the process of personal growth is learning to evaluate our experiences, both the good ones and the bad ones. And there are going to be times in our lives when we've got to forgive other people. And sometimes we've got to forgive ourselves for mistakes or hurts or things said or things done or things undone. For whatever reason, we've got to be willing to forgive and move on. Because when we fail to forgive, we end up carrying excess emotional baggage that only weighs us down and holds us back. That is unreleased hurts. Now, the fourth thing I believe lurking below the surface of our lives is unfulfilled dreams. Now, you've heard me say on this podcast before, I believe everybody has been put on this earth on purpose for a purpose. But until we discover what that purpose and what that passion and calling is, it remains an unfulfilled dream in our lives. But once we discover our why for being, why we've been put on that earth, that dream can still remain unfulfilled until we believe that we're capable of achieving it. In my book, Black Belt Leadership 101, I remind my readers you cannot achieve what you do not believe. So, what is it that you do not yet believe about yourself that is allowing your dreams to remain unfulfilled? That is the unfulfilled dream. Now, the fifth thing lurking below the surface of our lives, I believe, is unrealized goals. Now, unrealized goals are ambitions, they're aspirations, they're the visions that we've held on to that have yet come to fruition in our lives. These represent those areas of untapped potential and the areas where we're yearning for growth and achievement and advancement in our lives. These goals are often unrealized because we often lose focus, we get distracted, or we lack the persistence to keep moving forward and continuing until we succeed. Now, the sixth thing lurking below the surface of our lives, I believe, are the unknown unknowns. Hidden beneath the surface of our lives are the things we need to know that we don't yet know that are holding us back, weighing us down, or limiting our potential. Now, these unknown unknowns can take the form of an unknown risk that we've yet to consider as we pursue our goals and dreams. It can also take the form of an overlooked step in the process that causes us to stumble and fall. Again, we don't know what we don't know. And when we don't know what we don't know, we don't know what we don't know. Remember, unforeseen circumstances are going to happen. Hidden vulnerabilities are going to be revealed. Unexpected events are going to happen. They're problematic because we're not yet aware that they exist, but they're lurking beneath the surface of our lives, and at some point, they may rise to the surface. Now, the seventh thing lurking deep within us are unattained objectives. Now, very similar to unrealized goals, an unattained objective are the plans and the purposes that we've yet to achieve for a variety of reasons. Now, some of these objectives may be achievable, but they're still in process and we haven't completed them yet. But other unrealized goals may remain unrealized and unobtainable because at this point we lack resources or training or ability. We'll be able to achieve those objectives later as we continue to learn and grow and become a better version of who we are and what we do. But in the interim, we've got to be patient in the process. So when we're dealing with these unobtained objectives, it's important to focus on the objectives that we can achieve, even as we're continuing to work on improving ourselves to a point that those unobtainable objectives can now be obtained. Now, the eighth and final thing I believe is lurking beneath the surface of many of our lives are unexplored opportunities. Every single day, and you hear me say this often, every single day, life is trying to teach us a lesson. Life is trying to reveal to us new opportunities to learn, to grow, to expand, to take new territory, and to rise and fulfill more of our potential. But all too often, these opportunities show up disguised as a challenge. And when we only see the challenge at face value, the little bit that's above the surface of the water, we fail to see the huge opportunity that's lurking below the surface, and they exist within every circumstance or every situation that we face. This is why, to me, personal growth is so important and why daily personal growth is not an option. Because as we stretch the quality of our thinking, we're going to increase our ability to not only see those opportunities, but to seize those challenges that are before us every single day and wrestle the opportunity from it that's lurking below the surface. So let me conclude and wrap up today's teaching with the iceberg model of personal growth. And I want to really summarize what we've talked about up to this point today. The iceberg reminds us to look beyond surface behaviors and to explore underlying thoughts and feelings, beliefs, and values that drive our actions. As we look within, as we go through these moments of introspection, guess what? We're going to gain a greater understanding of who we are and what we're capable of saying, doing, and becoming as we continue the journey of personal growth. But when we learn to look below the surface of our lives, we see much more there. But also, when we learn to look below the surface of the people that are in our lives, we now begin to recognize not only what's going on in our lives, but recognize what's going on in theirs as well. We begin to recognize and understand their thoughts, their feelings, their beliefs, and their values. And in doing so, it enhances our perspective of who they are, the way they live life, and where they're coming from as they're looking to come alongside and serve and support and help us. When we take the time to look below the surface of the people around us, it deepens our understanding of who they are and where they've come to this point in their lives, and it improves our empathy toward our fellow man. Now, the iceberg also reminds us that transformative change only happens when we go beyond the surface of our lives and we get to the root of self-limiting beliefs and behaviors that are holding us back. Those things lurk below the surface, but they are holding us back from reaching our full potential. You got to remember that change happens first within as we change the quality of our thinking so that we can change the quality of our saying, doing, and becoming. Now, change happens within when we reshape our thoughts, our beliefs, and our opinions of ourselves as we move beyond I can't, so I won't, and we move to a mindset of I can and I will. Also important to remember that the most significant growth in our lives happens beneath the surface through times of self-reflection, through times of introspection, through times of developing self-discipline and learning from mistakes. This is that invisible growth area of our lives floating beneath the surface of what we and others can see that eventually paves the way for visible achievement in our personal and in our professional lives. Now, the iceberg serves as a reminder that obstacles are part of the journey. It requires that you and I be present in the moment so we can make the necessary course corrections to avoid disaster in our personal and professional lives. Circumstances and situations are going to happen. They may require that we have to pivot, to alter our course, or to change direction so we can continue to move forward unabated. You got to remember the road to success and significance isn't always a straight interstate highway. Sometimes it's a winding road that allows us or requires that we traverse the terrain to avoid the challenges that may float or drift in our direction. Now, lastly, the iceberg reminds us that our inner strength lies deep within you and deep within me, far below the surface. So when we focus on building our character, we focus on developing strong values, we establish the non-negotiables that govern our lives, and ultimately guide our actions. And when we do that, focusing on our character, developing strong values, and establishing non negotiables, these in turn define our behaviors and the characteristics of our lives that we want to model before others and we want to see them model in their lives. Now, one final lesson from the iceberg. I want to challenge you to take some time starting today for introspection and reflection. Much of what we need to learn, experience, and explore to become a better version of who we are and what we do, to become a world-class black belt master of our lives, develops below the surface. So we need to take time to evaluate our experiences all day, every day. We need to uncover and we need to apply the lessons in those experiences that are waiting to be learned. Evaluated experience, according to my mentor, Dr. John Maxwell, is a better teacher than experience by itself. Because evaluated experience is not only how you and I learn, it's how we examine, how we apply what we've learned to make our lives better. I want to challenge you to practice being mindful, because when we're present in the moment, we become skillful observers of life as it happens. And when we're present in the moment, that's where opportunities show up we may otherwise ignore or overlook. So by embracing the lessons of the iceberg, here's the summary. We can cultivate deeper self-awareness. We can foster more authentic relationships, and we can navigate our personal growth journey with greater insight and greater intention. This is how we discover what's below the surface of our lives and how we realize that we are capable of saying, doing, becoming, and accomplishing much, much more than we are right now. This is the lesson of the iceberg. I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.